Inflation is easing, wages are starting to increase, the job market remains competitive.
But one group is having an especially hard time finding careers with livable wages: formerly incarcerated people. 6 on Your Side investigates why and what advocates in the metro are doing to help them.
She's an attorney who went to federal prison.
So I know firsthand what it's like. I mean, it does not matter how many degrees you have, how much money you have, what your connections are. When you have that felony conviction, it's going to be difficult.
LaVon Stennis Williams started the Omaha nonprofit Reconnect Success in 2012, helping currently or formerly incarcerated people find careers.
Many people call them second chances, but we don't, because we realize that many people are going to their first chance.
With today's highly competitive job market, their work is more challenging than ever.
What we have now is because of a lot of employers who are now laying off. We have people who are coming out of prison competing with individuals who don't have felony convictions.
Compared to last year, the number of clients who have gotten a job within 30 days of release has gone down by 75% this year. Also down, the pay they're being offered.
They cannot make ends meet. They cannot get jobs that are paying livable wages, and it feeds into this pathway back into prison because they either give up or they find it's what I refer to as underground economics. They find ways to try to make ends meet, and sometimes it's not in their best interest or the community's interest.
Reentry specialist Chris Nielsen helps keep them optimistic during what can be an arduous process.
They're very malleable, and they obviously want to succeed. So just having a conversation with them about expectations, about presentation, about attitude a lot of times.
Since many haven't used modern technology in years, even decades, he vets candidates' skills and connects them directly with potential employers.
We develop relationships with employers throughout the community to try and bring these people directly to them in a forward-facing position and set up an interview directly with the employer instead of going through that rabbit hole of technology.
They also remind employers of the long-term value these clients bring to the table.
When you get a person coming out of prison, oftentimes you have one of your best workers because they have people who are so committed to doing well and getting back on their feet.
Stennis Williams also says finding reliable employment for formerly incarcerated people helps keep the community safer by reducing recidivism.
Breaking tonight.